Welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Dimas.
And I'm Brian Rollenbacher.
And we have a show that will evolve into something great, I think.
Well, we hope so.
We're talking a lot about evolution today, folks.
That's right. We're going to hear from philosopher and visiting scholar Mark Perez as he discusses the fallacies in the theory of evolution in RTB 101.
And in Give and Take, we'll hear from Jeff Swearing. He'll talk with Ken Samples, our philosopher and theologian, about whether both Christianity and Islam can both be true.
First up is Culture Talk. Sandra will be speaking with biochemist Fazale Rana on if the theory of evolution is scientifically settled. Let's check it out.
Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we discuss culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Dr. Fazale Rana. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Fuz.
Thanks for having me, Sandra.
So you are a biochemist, and you recently wrote a book with a few co-authors, and this book is called Thinking About Evolution, 25 Questions Christians Want Answered. I'm very excited for this book. It is the first multi-author with 4 different authors book produced and published by RTB Press. And it's been a book that we've worked on as a team for a few years. If you can just help kind of unpack the timing of this book's release and what the significance was.
Well, you know, in many respects, a book on evolution is really a timeless book because, you know, for many people who are in the church, evolution really represents a stumbling block for them, for their faith. The evolutionary framework creates doubts about whether or not their faith is valid, because many people would argue that, well, if evolutionary mechanisms can explain everything in biology, what role is there for a creator? And sadly, there are many skeptics and non-believers who are kept away from the Christian faith for that very reason. And so in one respect, responding to the evolutionary framework and giving people some tools to think about evolution is really a timeless endeavor. But on the other hand, among evangelicals, the idea of evolution has become rather prominent with the rise of organizations like BioLogos. We have many friends at BioLogos who we respect quite a bit, but they would argue that God is employing evolution as a way to create. And so this has given new attention to the idea of theistic evolution or evolutionary creation, as some people would describe that concept. And what we wanted to do with this book is show that there are actually bona fide scientific challenges to the evolutionary framework, and that the best model to think about evolution and our Christian faith is a perspective that we hold at RTB, which is Old Earth creationism.
So you mentioned a lot about the book's timing and how it's both timeless and timely, just given the significance of the popularity with BioLogos and just the idea of theistic evolution or evolutionary creation. Now, the book focuses on 25 questions. How was it determined which 25 questions would be addressed?
Yeah, well, when it comes to, you know, a topic like evolution, it's so expansive that there's no way that you could ever produce a book that gives a thorough and complete response or a thorough and complete engagement of that particular scientific idea. And so what we decided to do in the book is to identify 25 questions that we felt like captured the essence of the issues surrounding how evolution impacts the Christian faith, but also 25 questions that are the types of questions that we frequently hear asked by Christians. And so it really, those questions not only capture the essence of the issues, but also the points of curiosity that again, many Christians have.
And something that I really appreciate about this book is that we often hear Christians come from a theological perspective in how they have issue or take issue with evolution. But with thinking about evolution, we have yourself as a biochemist. We have Ann Jeanette Roberts, who's a molecular biologist, the late Sue Dykes, who was a paleoanthropologist, and then also a philosopher, Mark Perez, all joining together to set up a framework with scientific reasons why evolution is questionable. So can you give some of those reasons why, as a scientist, you would take issue with some aspects of evolution?
Yeah, well, for me, when it comes to why I'm not comfortable with the evolutionary framework, my objections are primarily scientific. They're not really biblical or theological. And to me, when it comes to evolution, it's got to have comprehensive explanatory power. And yet the evolutionary framework can't account for key transitions in the history of life on Earth, like the origin of life, the origin of complex cells, the origin of body plans, the origin of human exceptionalism as just some examples. And in the book, we go into detail as to why evolution falls short in those particular areas. But also, there are many instances where there's actually bona fide failed predictions of the evolutionary paradigm, where what the evolutionary paradigm would predict isn't supported or substantiated by the scientific evidence. And that's another reason to be questionable of the evolutionary framework. And then finally, many of the best evidence that people will cite for an evolutionary history of life on Earth could be readily explained within the context of a creation model. And so those are the reasons why not only I, but the late Sue Dykes and Anjanette Roberts and Mark Perez all really feel like old Earth creationism is a better way to account for the history of life on Earth.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that will be kind of a great way to introduce people to some scientific reasons why they would take a closer look at evolution, and really even how we define evolution. That's what I love about this book too, is that you explain it's not just, do you believe in evolution, yes or no, but you're also defining the terms because it's much more nuanced than just evolution, but macroevolution, microevolution, and so forth. So what are you hoping that this book will accomplish and who it will reach?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, the hope with this book is that it will give people who are Christians a framework to think about evolution. That's really ultimately what we wanted to accomplish. So not only did we talk about scientific issues with the evolutionary paradigm, but we spent a lot of effort giving people a framework to think about evolution. And then we talked about the scientific challenges within that framework, kind of illustrating to the reader how to think about evolution with bona fide examples that, again, illustrate how to think about evolution, but also highlight the scientific shortcomings of the paradigm.
Thank you so much for that, Fuzz. I'm really excited about this book. And for those who are watching or listening at home, if you'd like to get your copy of Thinking About Evolution in exchange for a donation of any amount, visit reasons.org/2819. And we'll send you the book if you send a donation between October and December of 2020. See you next time.
Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very important question: is old Earth creationism a slippery slope to evolution? Is one of our visiting scholars here at Reasons to Believe, Mr. Mark Perez. Welcome, Mark.
Good afternoon, Krista. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank
Now,
you.
I know that you contributed a chapter in our recent book, Thinking About Evolution. Maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about the purpose of your chapter.
The book itself is about evolution, asks questions. I think it's 25 questions about evolution is part of the title. And what we were trying to do with the chapter is to identify fallacies that can come up in some of the thinking that occurs when we're talking about evolution. So when we understand what the fallacies are, recognizing that they're not merely limited to evolution, but certainly show up there, we're able to identify them and be able to predict where they're going to show up or where they might show up, and then reverse them, or at least identify them and then take action on them. It allows us to find the truth much more easily and to avoid distortions.
So maybe the idea of fallacies is new for people. So maybe you can give us a little bit more of a definition of what you mean when you're talking about fallacies.
A fallacy is an error in reasoning or a mistake in reasoning that does not appear as if it's a mistake. And it's very easy to miss, but when it occurs, it's actually a violation of either a rules of reasoning or the rules of logic. There are formal fallacies and informal fallacies. And we'll probably talk today mostly about the informal fallacies.
Very good. So we're talking kind of about in this segment, this very common question that comes up when I talk often to my young earth creation friends at church. They will often accuse me of something like, well, the old earth creation position is a slippery slope to becoming an evolutionist. And I know they have certain concerns about me becoming an evolutionist because I'm an old earth creationist. But the slippery slope is actually an informal fallacy. So maybe you can talk to us about what the slippery slope fallacy is and how that comes into play here with that concern.
Sure. A slippery slope fallacy is an argument in which without good causal evidence, one believes that from the starting point you're at, that this event is the first one in a sequence of events that will lead to some harmful effect. So in the case of evolution, or someone who says, if you're an old earth creationist, then you're going to slip right into believing in the macroevolution. That is a slippery slope argument, because without causal evidence to show that from old earth creationism you're necessarily going to become an evolutionist, you're making a claim that does not follow. So it is a slippery slope apparently for some people, but here's where it happens. So for some young earth creationists, they look at old earth creationism and say, well, you're adopting the very same data that the evolutionists are using. And we'll say, well, maybe in some cases we are. Then they say, well, if you're going to adopt their data, you're going to adopt their inferences. And that's where the slippery slope ends. And that's where it becomes fallacious, because it isn't necessarily the case that we are going to take their inferences. In other words, we aren't going to necessarily say that because we see the same data, we come to the same conclusions, because in fact, we do not. So it looks like a slippery slope. Oh, the old earth creationists are just buying into everything that the evolutionists say. No, we're buying into some of their data, but we're not buying into their conclusions. Therefore, it's not a slippery slope.
Very good. That's a helpful distinction. So the data that I might be buying into is that I do see scientific credibility to an old earth. And so that might be some of the data that I'm buying into, but I don't buy into the inferences. So therefore, macroevolution is true. I am, after all, an old earth creationist. So I am still believing in the inference of creation. So that is kind of what creates that stopgap from it becoming the slippery slope. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. The important point is there is no causal evidence to believe that we will go into accepting the inferences. That's where the slippery slope ends. It's really not a slippery slope because there's no evidence that we're going to adopt those inferences, and we in fact deny those inferences.
I think understanding informal fallacies is a powerful tool in our toolbox when we are engaging in conversations, any conversations about our faith, helping us to identify those very common mistakes that we can make. So thank you for helping us understand more about the slippery slope fallacy. And I want to encourage everyone to check out the book that Mark is part of. His chapter is coming in the book called Thinking About Evolution, co-authored with our friends Dr. Fazale Rana, Dr. Anjanette Roberts, and Dr. Sue Dykes.
Hello, Jeff Waring, and welcome back to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific and philosophical ideas that equip you to be more confident in the truth of Christianity. I'm joined again today by my friend and colleague, Ken Samples, and we're going to look at whether Christianity and Islam can both be true or not. Ken, it's good to have you on the show today.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
So we've, there's a lot of people in the world who are Christians. There's a lot of people in the world who are Muslims. There's a number of people who will say we're worshiping the same God, we're the same religion. Let's kind of explore that. I mean, there are some similarities between the two religions. What are some of those similarities?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jeff, that if you add up Christians and Muslims, it makes about 55% of the world's population. I mean, that's a staggering figure. Christianity and Islam do have common ground. They share common ground. For example, both of them are philosophically oriented in a theism, an infinite personal God. Both are monotheistic. Both believe that there's one God, and both come out of the Middle East. Moreover, both of them appeal to Abraham, so rooting itself in the Hebrew Old Testament. Those are important similarities, and Christianity has more in common with Islam than it would, for example, with Hinduism or Buddhism.
So there are a lot of similarities there, but obviously we think there are differences. So let's kind of, what are some of the big differences, not things that you would say really truly separate them? It's like these things just can't be reconciled together.
Yeah, let me mention, there are a number of things that they differ about. Let me mention three of them that I think are really significant. First of all, Muslims and Christians have very different conceptions of God. Even though they're theistic and even though they're monotheistic, Christianity believes that the one God exists as three distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We call that the Trinity. Islam denies the Trinity. In fact, in the Quran, it not only denies the Trinity, it misstates the Trinity. It says that the Trinity is the Father, Son, and Virgin Mary, which gives me the indication I don't think Muhammad ever really had a clear understanding of the Trinity. So when you say, for example, when people say Christians and Muslims worship the same God, the more critical view would be from the Islamic side. They'd say, no, we don't. We don't worship a triune God. Allah has no son. He has no partners. He has no equals. And I would add that there is a fundamental difference when it comes to the person of Christ. Muslims have very positive things to say about Jesus. They call him Isa. They say, for example, he was born of a virgin. They say that he performed miracles. They say that he lived a holy life, but they categorically deny his deity. He's merely a human being. He's a human prophet. And then thirdly, Islam is not a redemptive religion. They deny that Christ died on the cross. They deny original sin. They deny salvation by grace. In fact, in Islam, both paradise and judgment are earned rewards. And so you need to subordinate yourself to Allah in order to hopefully achieve paradise. I think what we can say, Jeff, is if Islam is true, Christianity is false, or vice versa. If Christianity is true, Islam is false, because Islam denies the very essence of Christianity.
Well, that's interesting, because the examples you give there, who is God? Is he one God in one person? Is he one God in three persons? You can be monotheistic and theistic philosophically, but you're kind of hitting right at the heart of who you're worshiping. It strikes me as that's not a small difference, or not a different perspective or anything. Have people tried to reconcile that and say, oh, that's really the same thing? Or, I mean, that's really seems to be a big difference to me.
I mean, I would say the laws of logic are stubborn things. And, if you say Jesus Christ is God incarnate, and then you say Jesus Christ is not God incarnate, both of those statements, they negate or deny one another. Christians say Jesus is God in human flesh. Muslims say he is not God in human flesh. Both of those statements can't be true. And it's either one or the other. And so these are not secondary issues. Certainly, Muslims and Christians have common ground, but as soon as we get back to the Christian essentials, we see real serious conflict between the two faiths.
Well, so there are some who would say, and I think these are people who probably don't understand Christianity well, but who argue, yeah, Jesus is a good person and really he's the one we want to follow. And so in some sense, his deity really doesn't matter. That you're kind of really looking at the same thing there. How would you respond to somebody who makes a claim like that or tries to argue that way?
Yeah, I would say, the idea that Jesus is merely a man, maybe he's a prophet, as Muslims believe him to be, or maybe he's just a controversial figure. I would say that changes the very orientation of Christianity. I mean, the Christian message is that God has entered into the world. The second person of the Trinity has become man. He's made humans in his image and now has provided a way of redeeming them. I would say a denial of Jesus's deity reflects kind of a liberal theology. Or, and this is interesting, both traditional Judaism and Islam both think Jesus was merely a man. So Christianity there distinguish itself from its theistic neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's just a fascinating thing that it's not talking about trivial things within Christianity here. These differences hit at the heart of Christianity, not sort of things you can just say, well, we can fudge a little bit and we still have Christianity. I know you mentioned a few other things in your article. So just kind of, can you briefly illustrate or articulate some of those other differences that we see between Islam and Christianity?
Yeah, what's interesting is that Christians and Jews both believe that human beings are made in God's image, that we bear the image of God. That gives us dignity and value. Interestingly, Jeff, Islam denies the image of God. It says that would put human beings too close to Allah. They have a very real sensitivity about anything being compared to Allah. Moreover, they deny original sin. Original sin is the idea that we have been given a sinful nature and a propensity to sin. Islam denies that. I mean, that's a puzzler because Islam has had so much tension with violence in its history, but it denies original sin. And then finally, there really is a sense in which there's no grace available. Islam is really a religion of you putting your nose to the grindstone and following the will of Allah.
Well, thanks, Ken. I appreciate your comments today. They've been very helpful. A lot of people would like to claim that Islam and Christianity are just the same. We're worshiping the same God, the creator who's fashioned everything, who we're trying to earn our salvation from. But when you look at the details, what these religions actually say, they make polar opposite claims, things that just both can't be true at the same time. If Christianity is true, Islam cannot be. If Islam's true, Christianity cannot be. I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and check out Ken's article on this. It's called How Does Islam Differ from Christianity? And it will equip you with some great insight that allows you to engage in dialogue to be able to see what are the differences between these two religions and how to illustrate that Christianity is the one true religion and that's the true God that we want to serve.
That does it for us this week on 2819. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helped equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And don't forget, for more cool topics like this, subscribe to the show on YouTube and also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you'd like to hear the audio version of the show, you can get it on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.